Hey guys, tonight we slip into the slow, shimmering heat of medieval Persia, where the air wavers like a tired mirage and every step you take makes you wonder why anyone thought building cities in a sun-baked desert was a smart idea. You feel the grit of sand against your ankles as you trudge through a road that was never meant for comfort, brushing past travelers who look just as overheated as you. The sun hangs overhead like it's doing a paid internship, refusing to clock out, and you're already thinking that if someone doesn't hand you something cold soon, you might actually melt into a decorative puddle. This is the perfect moment, the moment when an entire culture began quietly craving relief, long before the word ice cream ever drifted into anyone's vocabulary. And you probably won't survive this heat either, not unless you find the people who first thought, hey, what if we freeze something and then eat it? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. There's always someone tuning in at 3:47 a.m. wondering why their life choices have led them to medieval frozen desserts. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift into the outskirts of a sprawling Persian town, where the heat presses against you like a heavy quilt you never asked for. The streets are dusty, the walls sun-bleached, and the people surprisingly calm, even though it's hot enough to fry a chickpea on a rooftop tile. You follow the rhythm of the marketplace, a slow hum of merchants who've learned to adapt to the climate with a patience you don't quite have yet. Somewhere between the spice sellers and the water carriers, you begin hearing whispers about something cold, something that doesn't belong in a place where the sun wins every argument. This is where the earliest cravings began. Not cravings for luxury, but for mercy. Medieval Persia wasn't just warm, it was blistering, and finding relief was practically a sport. People carried thin cloths soaked in rosewater just to drape over their faces. They slept on flat rooftops under stars because indoor heat made you feel like you were being slow roasted. And, in your case, you're already imagining a frozen drink so badly that even the local camels look cooler than you. One mainstream historical fact you discover early: the region's climate pushed people toward ingenious cooling technologies centuries before the rest of the world caught on. When it's 40 degrees Celsius at sunset, innovation becomes survival. As you weave through the streets, a boy hands you a cup of something herbal, lukewarm, unfortunately, but infused with mint. Apparently, this counts as refreshing. The cup is clay, porous enough that water evaporates through it, cooling the drink inside just enough to make you think, fine, this is acceptable. But the real magic hasn't appeared yet. The merchants talk in low, amused tones about frozen delights brought from mountain peaks, and you smell something sweet lingering in the air, almost like chilled syrup. You perk up instantly. A joke slips into your tired brain: you're basically a medieval tourist chasing air conditioning before air conditioning exists. You overhear an older man explaining, with suspicious confidence, that some villages use secret jars buried deep underground to chill their treats. Another insists the idea came from travelers who saw snow drinks in distant lands. Historians still argue whether the innovation began in the mountains, in royal courts, or with humble villagers just fed up with sweating. No one agrees, but everyone stands by their preferred version like it's a family recipe. Meanwhile, a quirky local tidbit emerges: some early chilled mixtures included crushed violets or even powdered pearls, purely for cooling energy, though you suspect it's also because people enjoy bragging rights. Imagine telling your friends, yeah, I drank something colder than your future and it had gemstones in it. Eventually, you reach a quiet courtyard shaded by a towering tree, the kind that looks like it's been doing the heavy lifting of providing shade for several hundred years. A small crowd gathers around a vendor who promises cold relief, and you inch closer with the hopeful desperation of someone waiting for the last slice of pizza. But when you arrive, you don't get ice cream, not yet. Instead, you get the origin story: sweetened syrups poured over snow, or over crushed ice hauled down from far-off mountains. You sip it gently, and a shiver rises across your tongue. It's not creamy. It's not modern. But in this heat, it might as well be divine. You stand there letting the cold settle against the back of your throat, and something slow begins to unfurl, an understanding. Frozen treats didn't arrive all at once. They rose like a quiet rebellion. One vendor here. One feast there. Small experiments conducted by overheated geniuses who simply decided the sun didn't get to call all the shots. You can almost sense the future ice cream houses forming like constellations in the distance, faint and not yet connected, but glowing with possibility. You wander away from the courtyard, letting the lingering chill carry you forward through the dusty evening. Somewhere behind you, the vendor laughs with a customer. The heat may rule by day, but the first whispers of icy relief have begun, and you're right at the edge of it, already wanting more, already chasing the next hint of cold sweetness like a medieval kid waiting for summer snow. You follow the faint trail of cool relief deeper into the settlement, and the sun finally decides to show mercy, sinking into a softer, apricot glow. But don't get too relaxed, it's still warm enough that your shirt clings to your back like a needy cat. The evening breeze barely brushes your skin, but it's enough to guide you toward something monumental rising in the distance. At first you think it's a giant overturned bowl or maybe an unusually large termite mound. But as you walk closer, its shape becomes more defined, massive, geometric, strangely serene. A structure that looks like it should hum quietly with ancient secrets. And it sort of does. You're standing before a yachtchal, Persia's great ice vault. The thing towers above you like a clay mountain sculpted by an engineer with steady hands and excellent desert survival instincts. It's built from a mixture called saruj, the ancient cousin of concrete, made from sand, lime, clay, ash, and goat hair. Yes, goat hair. And yes, that's your first light joke of this section, medieval Persian construction casually doubling as low-key goat barbershop. You place a hand on the cool surface. Somehow, mysteriously, stubbornly, the structure stays chilled even though the air around you is stubbornly not. A mainstream historical fact greets you as naturally as the breeze. Yachtchals could store ice collected in winter or made in shallow nighttime basins through evaporative cooling. These domed giants held ice for months, surviving blistering summers without melting into a sad puddle of regrets. You circle the base, noting small ventilation channels carved like delicate veins. Cold air sinks. Hot air rises. And the ancient Persians manipulated that simple truth with the kind of architectural mastery that makes modern HVAC systems blush. You can almost hear an engineer whisper, "Take notes, future generations." As you approach the entrance, a guard waves you forward with the indifference of a man who's been standing in the heat too long. You duck inside, and instantly, the temperature drops. Not dramatically, but noticeably. It's like stepping from a sauna into a slightly annoyed refrigerator. A small shiver runs through your arms, and you can't help thinking that this dome might be the closest thing to a medieval spa day. A few workers are inside, organizing blocks of winter-harvested ice. They stack them carefully, covering each layer with straw to insulate it. You watch as they carve away chunks that have fused together. Apparently, teamwork is required to break up an ancient ice cube. The workers joke with each other, pausing occasionally to sip sweet, chilled rosewater from clay cups that sweat gently in the cool darkness. Near the back wall, you notice something odd, a small pot half buried in the ground. The earth around it is colder, packed tight with frost. A worker explains that the pot holds a mixture of syrup and spices, an experiment, he says, part of a cooling ritual meant to create a concentrated treat for special occasions. This is your quirky tidbit. Early frozen desserts sometimes began as ritual offerings, chilled in the same vaults that preserved life-saving ice. You try not to look too excited, but you're essentially watching the ancestor of popsicles being test-driven by a man who probably doesn't realize he's contributing to dessert history. But the yachtchal isn't just a refrigerator, it's a time capsule. Here, in the quiet coolness, you start hearing whispers of debates that historians still argue whether to categorize as intentional engineering marvels or lucky accidents perfected over centuries. Was the dome shape chosen because of its airflow efficiency or simply because it was easy to build in that size? Did the angled walls reflect heat on purpose or by happy coincidence? The truth wavers like heat over sand, and no one seems bothered by the uncertainty. You linger near the ventilation shaft, watching the desert breeze snake through the opening and descend with surprising chill. The ingenuity isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It's slow, thoughtful, persistent, much like everything in this story. These ice houses weren't built in a single leap of technological aha. They were refined, generation by generation, by people who simply refused to let the sun dictate the menu. Stepping back outside, the evening sky has settled into violet tones, and a handful of stars peek out as if trying to eavesdrop on your thoughts. You glance back at the Yakshul's silhouette. It doesn't look like a building anymore, not really. It looks like resilience given shape. A geometry lesson wrapped in historical determination. And maybe, if you squint hard enough, a giant clay cupcake, but that's just your imagination getting hungry. You start walking again, leaving the Yakshul behind as its domed shadow stretches across the sands. But you're carrying something new now, the understanding that ice wasn't just a luxury in medieval Persia, it was a stored promise, a quiet rebellion against the desert's authority. And somewhere ahead, you know that promise is going to evolve into something sweeter, softer, cooler, something closer to the icy treat you're craving. You leave the Yakshul behind, its domed silhouette shrinking as you walk toward the edge of the settlement, where the air feels a little sharper and the landscape stretches out like a giant parchment the desert forgot to decorate. The road beneath you turns stony, scattered with tracks from caravans that passed long before you arrived. The sky deepens into a bruised indigo, and a thin crescent moon hangs overhead like a blade too tired to cut anything. You follow the faint clinking of gear and the low murmur of voices until you reach a staging area where a small caravan prepares for a nighttime journey that defies all logic. They're headed into the mountains to fetch snow. You stand there blinking, trying to decide if this is heroic or suspiciously close to a medieval delivery service. One man tightens a leather strap across a mule carrying empty baskets. Another checks a set of woolen blankets that, soon enough, will wrap blocks of snow like sleeping babies. A mainstream historical fact settles easily into your mind: snow collection from nearby mountains was a common practice across parts of Persia, especially where Yakshuls alone couldn't meet demand. These mountain routes were the lifelines that kept ice supplies steady through blistering summers. A wiry snow trader with a sun-beaten face gestures for you to join their group. You fall into step beside him as the caravan departs, moving into the quiet of the open land. The night air cools slightly, though cool is generous. It's more like the heat finally took a bathroom break. The trader explains that the journey must always begin after sunset. Snow melts fast, and timing is everything. You nod seriously, pretending you're absolutely the type of person who thinks strategically about frozen water. Actually, you're mostly thinking about the fact that these people casually treat mountains like giant freezers, and you can't even trust your own freezer to keep ice cream hard for more than a day. The road winds upward. With each hour, the breeze grows stronger, tinged with the faint mineral scent of mountain stone. A mule snorts behind you, almost as if grumbling about unpaid overtime. The trader laughs, telling you a quirky tidbit: some caravans used to enlist snow goats. Yes, goats, trained to carry small sacks of mountain snow down steep paths more nimbly than people. Was this efficient? Was this just medieval chaos disguised as innovation? Hard to say. But historians still argue whether the stories are literal accounts or exaggerated tales passed down by mountain communities with very enthusiastic imaginations. By the time you reach higher elevation, the moonlight glints off pale patches scattered across the slopes. Snow. Actual snow. Not the cute sprinkle on postcards, real, compacted, slightly dirty, late-season mountain snow. The traders get to work. They scrape up the cleanest layers, avoiding anything suspiciously goat-adjacent. They pack the snow tightly into baskets, wrap it all in thick blankets, and seal it with leather ties. You watch them work with surprising rhythm, as if centuries of practice have honed this into a practiced choreography. You sink onto a rock, rubbing your hands together. Not because it's cold, it really isn't, but because you're pretending to blend in. The trader sits beside you and shares a small flask of sweetened saffron drink. It's warm, ironically, but comforting. You sip and ask him the obvious question: why risk the steep climbs, the coyotes, the cold nights, the long return journey, all for snow? He grins. Because people will always want something cold. And you can't argue with that. It's the simplest truth in this entire saga. As they finish packing the snow, the caravan begins the descent. This part is trickier. One wrong step and your carefully gathered treasure becomes a sad puddle long before reaching the valley. The mule in front of you stumbles briefly, and you have a flash of panic imagining centuries of future dessert innovation dripping into the dust. But the trader steadies the animal with practiced ease. You continue, moonlight carving soft lines across the path. During the descent, he tells you another debate among scholars. Some believe that transporting mountain snow predates formal yachtal construction, while others argue that the two systems evolved together like siblings who didn't always get along. You picture two rival engineers arguing over logistics in a sandstorm and decide that history is more entertaining when no one agrees. Hours pass. The landscape evens out, and warm air creeps back over your skin like an overeager cat. But the snow baskets remain intact. The blankets stay cool. The riders maintain a steady pace, knowing they are racing the rising sun. Back in the settlement, the yachtal workers will unpack the baskets and stack the precious snow deep inside the vault. Some will be stored, some sold, and some set aside for early morning treats that will melt before midday. As the first glimmers of dawn stretch across the horizon, the caravan returns to the outskirts of town. You watch as the workers quickly transfer the baskets into shaded corridors, their movements brisk and efficient. The snow has survived. Barely. But survival is enough. You stand there, dust on your boots, sweat on your neck, and the faint chill of mountain air lingering in your memory. It hits you then: the rise of frozen desserts was never just about recipes. It was about journeys. Hard journeys. Ones that required skill, stubbornness, and a willingness to climb a mountain at night for no reason other than giving overheated people a moment of bliss. And in this moment, as the sun peaks over the desert, you realize you've unknowingly joined the very first supply chain of ice cream history. Congratulations, you're officially a medieval gig worker. You wake from a brief, accidental doze, because apparently climbing mountains at night and helping transport ancient snow is exhausting even in imagination, and find yourself drifting back toward the heart of the settlement. The morning sun is rising lazily, as if it also stayed up too late, and the air already carries the scent of roasting grains and steeping herbs. You follow the aroma with the gravitational pull of someone who has not had breakfast in several centuries. The marketplace is stirring. Merchants lift wooden shutters, sweep dust from their doorsteps, and begin ladling fragrant liquids into clay jugs. Somewhere between a spice stall and a wool trader, you stumble upon a row of drink sellers whose tables overflow with glass jars. Well, not glass, exactly, they're polished, translucent clay, the kind that tries its best to pretend it's fancy. Inside each vessel, syrups. Cold syrups. Sweet syrups. Syrups with colors so soft and inviting they look like potions from a polite wizard. You lean in to examine a jar filled with pale pink liquid. The vendor smiles, dipping a ladle to offer you a taste. You sip, and a wave of rosewater slips across your tongue, delicate, floral, slightly cool. Not cold, but cooler than the air, which is already hot enough to make you consider renting shade by the hour. A mainstream historical fact nestles into the moment. Persian markets were famous for fragrant syrups, sherbet, made from rose, mint, violets, lemons, mulberries, and sometimes even spices like cardamom and saffron. These were more than drinks, they were the base notes of an ice cream dynasty still incubating in the collective imagination. A young girl at the next stall pounds fresh herbs with a stone pestle, her hands stained green from mint and basil. She looks up long enough to explain that her family makes the coldest cooler in town. You're intrigued, though the phrase coldest here feels optimistic. She pours you a cup of mint sherbet mixed with crushed ice, tiny chips shaved from the caravan's newly delivered snow. One sip and your lungs feel like they're wearing menthol pajamas. As you walk the row, vendors pitch their creations in voices full of pride and mild competitive sass. One brags about using the finest saffron threads so expensive you half expect them to come with a warranty. Another claims his syrup has healing properties, which is definitely your quirky tidbit of the day. Some medieval Persians believed that chilled herbal drinks could rebalance the body's hot humors. You wonder if this counts as ancient science or ancient vibes, but either way, it's charming. A vendor in a turquoise robe calls out to you. He has jars filled with deep burgundy syrup. He explains that it's made from sour cherries cooked down slowly with sugar, left to thicken until it glows like sunset caught in a bottle. You try a sip mixed with chilled water, and it's both tart and soothing, like a drink that understands your emotional range. He lowers his voice conspiratorially and tells you a fragment of debate that scholars still argue whether to classify as culinary influence or coincidental similarity. Did early Persian sherbet inspire Mediterranean sorbet later on? Or did those frozen treats evolve independently, like two chefs inventing iced coffee at the same time and then arguing about who did it first? The answer is lost to history, but the uncertainty only makes the flavors taste richer, like you're sipping on cultural crossroads in a cup. A group of travelers gathers nearby, discussing their preferred mix-ins. Some swear by crushed pistachios. Others add a dash of vinegar for a tangy kick, which sounds alarming until you remember medieval people loved mixing sweet and sour like it was a competitive sport. You watch as a man stirs a bowl of syrup so vigorously it looks like he's trying to punish it. He sprinkles in dried violets and stirs again, creating a concoction that smells like springtime signed a lease on your nasal passages. You stroll deeper into the market, and the temperature rises with every step. You feel the sun pressing insistently against your shoulders, like a toddler trying to get your attention. But each time you lift a cup of herb-infused cooler, the world softens, just a little. You're beginning to understand that these early syrups weren't just flavorings, they were the quiet, essential backbone of what would eventually slide into the realm of ice cream. At a corner stall, an elderly woman beckons you with a crooked finger. Her table is lined with small clay pots sealed with wax. She breaks one open, releasing a burst of saffron-sweet aroma. The inside reveals a thick, creamy syrup, more concentrated than anything you've seen so far. She explains that this paste is meant to be diluted with snow or crushed ice for a decadent treat reserved only for special guests. You taste a tiny drop, and your eyebrows nearly fly off your forehead. It's rich, floral, and tastes like saffron personally blessed your taste buds. She laughs, telling you that her grandmother taught her the recipe, and her grandmother learned it from someone who swore it came from a poet's household. Whether that's true or just excellent marketing, you can't tell. What you do know is that the flavor lingers long after you walk away, hovering like a memory of something that hasn't fully formed yet. As you continue your slow drift through the market, the path begins to shimmer with heat again. But now, every scent, rose, mint, basil, saffron, feels like a breadcrumb in the trail leading to something colder, sweeter, and more revolutionary than these merchants realize. The sun climbs higher, and the breeze grows shy. But your tongue remembers the chill of crushed snow. Your nose remembers the perfume of syrups. Your mind begins stitching these sensations together, imagining what happens when these flavors finally meet true ice. You don't know it yet, but you've just walked through the quiet laboratory where future ice cream begins. You wander away from the market, letting the scents of rosewater and mint fade into the background as the city slowly shifts into its midday rhythm. The sun is now fully awake, too awake, honestly, and the streets gleam with that unmistakable, you really shouldn't be outside right now, shimmer. But you push forward, drawn not by the heat, but by a faint procession of music drifting over tiled rooftops. Drums. Flutes. The soft clatter of servants arranging something important. You follow the sound toward the palace district, where carved archways cast long shadows and guards stand at their posts with the stoic expression of men who have absolutely mastered the art of pretending not to sweat. As you pass through a series of shaded corridors, the noise grows richer, more layered, until you find yourself stepping into an open courtyard reserved for something far more opulent than the market's herbal coolers, a royal feast. If the marketplace was a laboratory, this, in all its gold and lapis glory, is the showroom. Musicians sit against marble walls, plucking strings that echo through the warm air. Servants glide across the courtyard carrying trays piled with fruits, breads, spiced meats, and bowls brimming with glistening syrups. But you're not here for any of that. No, you're here because some brilliant, heat-weary court chef, has prepared a chilled dessert for tonight's entertainment. A mainstream historical fact taps politely on your shoulder. Persian courts were known for serving cold delicacies during feasts, especially those that required snow or ice from vaults or mountain caravans. Chilled dishes weren't just refreshing, they were status symbols, edible proof that the royal household controlled resources beyond mere wealth. You lean against a column as a line of servants carries in large metal basins wrapped in cloth. The guests murmur with anticipation. A steward approaches, lifting the cloth to reveal something pale and glistening beneath, a mixture of sweetened syrup poured over finely crushed ice, thick enough to eat with a spoon. The scent is unmistakable, rosewater, maybe a hint of cardamom, maybe even saffron if someone was feeling bold. The court erupts in soft admiration. You tell yourself not to drool. A servant offers you a small cup. The first bite sends a cold ripple across your tongue, followed by sweetness that blooms like a slow sunrise. It's so refreshing that you briefly consider writing a thank you note to the yakshul itself. The flavor is deeper than the market coolers, silky, floral, and tasted like a poet composed it. Nearby, the court astrologer mutters that chilled foods have cooling humors beneficial for balancing the body on hot days, and you mentally add this to your ever-growing list of things medieval people say with absolute confidence. Still, you can't argue with the result. You notice something curious as the feast progresses. Only certain guests receive the chilled dessert. It's handed with ceremony, almost reverence, reinforcing a truth you hadn't fully realized: cold treats were political. They signaled access, status, and favor. The king might as well be handing out portable slices of power. But your quirky tidbit for this section arrives in the form of a whisper from a musician sitting nearby. Supposedly, one queen insisted on having cold fruit slushes even during winter, forcing her servants to create fake summer by warming the palace and chilling the dessert separately. Whether that's true or just palace gossip is unclear. Historians still argue whether the anecdote reflects real royal luxury or exaggerated court satire passed down by storytellers with excellent comedic timing. As the music swells, dancers appear, spinning slowly at first, then lightly stamping out rhythms that make even the stoic guards lean forward. The dessert cools your breath, and suddenly everything looks shinier, smoother, more dreamlike. The bitter heat outside the courtyard feels like a distant rumor. You watch the head chef from across the courtyard, standing proudly with arms folded. His assistants scurry around him, carrying basins of melting ice, fresh herbs, and bowls of syrup thicker than honey. You realize that behind the elegance of this moment lies a delicate race. Ice melts. Even in shade. Even in marble courtyards. Every dish served at the perfect temperature requires timing, coordination, and a touch of controlled chaos. Imagine being that chef, architect of temporary coldness in a place where the sun wins almost every battle. You smile because you can already see how their improvised techniques, perfected under pressure, will eventually seep into the habits of everyday cooks across the region. Recipes filtered down. Techniques adopted. Soon enough, the concept of cold desserts would tug its way from the palace to the bazaar, from elite tables to the hands of street vendors. The music softens. Servants carry out the empty basins. The dancers take their bows. A warm breeze drifts across the courtyard, lifting the last traces of chilled sweetness from your lips. As you turn to leave, one final detail catches your eye: a platter of crushed nuts, pistachios, almonds, walnuts, set beside the dessert bowls. You don't see anyone using them yet, but you feel a spark, a foreshadowing, the kind of detail you tuck into your pocket with a knowing smile. Because when nuts, syrups, and ice meet in the right combination, well, the world gets just a little more delicious. You step out of the palace district still carrying a faint sweetness on your tongue, the kind that makes everything afterward feel slightly disappointing. The air is hotter now, full midday blaze, and you instinctively search for shade like a lizard with refined taste. Lucky for you, the bazaar awaits, humming with new energy. Morning merchants have swapped their breakfast wares for their midday specialties, and the streets have turned into an orchestra of haggling voices, clinking cups, sizzling pans, and the occasional camel making noises that definitely ruin the atmosphere. But you push through, because ahead, in the mess of cloth canopies and dusty alleys, something quietly revolutionary is happening. You notice the signs first, wooden planks painted with little flowers, or small bowls, or smiling suns. They're not official signs, just the visual language of street vendors who know their clientele can't read, but still want to stand out. Beneath one canopy, a young man scrapes at a thin slab of ice with a metal spoon, carving curls into a clay bowl. A young woman waves you over to her stall, a small wooden table beneath a fabric canopy dyed a cheerful yellow. She works quickly, scraping a block of partially melted ice into a bowl, then topping it with a syrup so fragrant you swear your soul just sat upright to pay attention. She adds a sprinkle of mint, then another of crushed almonds, then she hands it to you with a casual, "Try this one." The taste is bright, layered, textured. You can feel the memory of palace desserts in it, but there's something more, improvisation. This is not a royal recipe, this is someone taking what she's heard, tweaking it, simplifying it, adapting it. And you realize at once that innovations don't always require marble floors and gold-rimmed bowls. Sometimes they just require someone with good instincts and a lucky stall location. She's not alone. Everywhere you turn, vendors manipulate the same basic ingredients, ice, syrups, nuts, herbs, but new combinations keep emerging. One mixes pomegranate and mint. Another uses sour orange and honey. A third, sweating profusely but refusing to give up, mixes rose and vinegar, insisting it's for digestion, which you silently label as medieval kombucha energy. As you drift between stalls, watching vendors scoop, scrape, pour, and stir, something beautiful begins to unfold, a pattern. Not a visible one, an invisible, cultural rhythm. A shared curiosity. A collective desire. From royal kitchens to market stalls, cold dessert culture is forming like a slow-frozen mosaic, piece by piece, recipe by recipe. The sun grows hotter, shadows shorter. Every vendor adjusts, adding cloth over their ice, moving bowls into shade, stirring constantly to keep textures smooth. You learn that no two vendors agree on the right ratio of syrup to ice. Historians still argue whether certain early recipes came from court households or from the bazaar first. Everyone claims their own origin story. Everyone insists their mixture is the true way. And honestly, you love every minute of the chaos. As you wipe sticky syrup from your fingers, you watch a final vendor lean over his bowl, tweaking something with the intensity of a man exploring the limits of dessert-based physics. That's when you fully understand, these quiet tweaks, the adjustments made under canopies, over melting ice, between shouts to customers, are the beginnings of true ice cream invention. Not the final product. Not yet. But the slow, warm heartbeat of possibility. And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of the bazaar and the soft crackle of melting ice, you can feel it, the dessert world is about to get colder, creamier, and infinitely more delicious. You drift away from the bazaar's musical chaos, your fingers still a little sticky and your mind pleasantly foggy from sugar and heat. The sun hangs overhead with the self-satisfaction of someone who knows they're the center of attention. You follow a quieter side street, letting the market's noise fade until all you hear are distant voices, the shuffle of sandals, and the soft cluck of chickens who clearly think they own the neighborhood. This part of town feels different, slower, calmer, more intimate. Courtyard walls rise around you, mud brick and sun-kissed, broken only by wooden doorways carved with geometric patterns. You pass one open doorway and catch a glimpse of a shaded inner yard, a fountain tinkling gently, two fig trees leaning toward each other like gossiping aunties, and a woman kneeling beside a ceramic bowl filled with something pale and softly shining. You step closer. She notices you, smiles with the kind of warmth that isn't bothered by strangers wandering in, and gestures for you to enter. You obey because, frankly, you trust anyone who radiates. I've perfected at least 6 recipes you've never heard of. Inside the courtyard, the temperature drops just enough to make your shoulders relax. A canopy hangs overhead, diffusing sunlight into soft gold. 3 women sit around a low table, each working on something different, one chopping herbs, one grinding pistachios into a thick paste, and one stirring a bowl over a small pot of warm water. It doesn't take long to realize you've wandered into the engine room of early frozen dessert evolution. A mainstream historical fact settles into the scene. Women in medieval Persian households were often the keepers of flavor traditions, creating syrups, pastes, creams, and herbal mixtures that later shaped the recipes sold in bazaars and presented at court feasts. Their contributions rarely made it into official records, but they formed the backbone of culinary innovation. The woman stirring the bowl lifts her spoon and lets a ribbon of creamy liquid fall back into the mixture. It's thick, thicker than sherbet, thicker than syrup. You lean in, intrigued. She explains that it's a mixture of milk, saffron, and a bit of honey, cooked slowly until it becomes silky. It's not ice cream, not yet, but it's a crucial step toward the textures future generations will crave. She's testing a recipe her grandmother passed down, adjusting thickness by instinct rather than measurement. You sense another recipe forming nearby. A younger woman sits cross-legged, crushing mint leaves with rose petals using a stone mortar. The aroma that drifts upward is something close to perfume, close to medicine, close to dessert. She mixes it with a small bowl of sweetened curds, a creamy base that you realize could become something magical when chilled with ice. She laughs lightly, telling you she's trying to make the mixture cold-friendly. You immediately approve of this ambition. Your quirky tidbit arrives in the form of a whispered story from the eldest woman. Some families experimented with freezing milk mixtures using clay pots lowered into shallow pits at night. The desert's temperature fluctuations were just enough to firm the mixture slightly, creating a proto-frozen dessert they served early in the morning before it melted. Whether this technique worked consistently is questionable. Historians still argue whether these nighttime cooling pits were practical innovations or simply hopeful culinary experiments fueled by equal parts imagination and overheating. You sit near the fountain, watching the women work. They move with a kind of effortless rhythm, one stirring, one grinding, one tasting. Recipes pass between them through gestures, murmurs, and jokes. You catch snippets. More saffron, it tastes shy. Too much mint and it becomes medicinal. Don't let it thicken too much, it'll seize when chilled. Who forgot to close the fig jar? Their collaboration feels like music, unhurried, intuitive, grounded in countless repetitions. And you realize something quietly profound: innovation doesn't always happen in grand kitchens with gold-plated bowls. Sometimes it blossoms in sun-dappled courtyards where women share stories while stirring something hopeful over a flame. The eldest woman hands you a small clay cup of the saffron milk mixture, still warm, but thick and fragrant. You sip. It coats your tongue like velvet. It tastes nothing like ice cream, and yet, somehow, exactly like the ancestor of it. You can sense the future possibilities buried in the flavor, dormant like seeds waiting for frost. She nods approvingly. When we chill it with ice, she says, it becomes something different. Something special. You watch as they wrap their bowls in damp cloths and place them inside a shaded niche built into the courtyard wall, where the breeze slips through a carved lattice. This tiny cooling alcove, a primitive refrigerator, is part of the household's rhythm. Later, when the mountain ice arrives, they will mix the chilled creams with shaved ice, folding it gently until it thickens into a treat the whole family will share. One woman jokes that her mixture turns out better during arguments, because the stirring becomes more vigorous. Another counters that sweets taste best when made during good gossip. You're not sure which culinary theory is correct, but you admire the research that's gone into both. As the sun leans westward, the women begin preparing an evening treat. They scoop crushed ice into shallow clay dishes, top it with the mint rose curd mixture, and sprinkle pistachios over the top with practiced elegance. They offer you one, and you sit under the fig trees enjoying the chilled sweetness as birds chirp lazily overhead. You realize, in this quiet courtyard, surrounded by scent, laughter, and the soft scrape of spoons, that the rise of frozen desserts didn't come only from royal ambition or merchant ingenuity. It grew from home kitchens, small places where women experimented, refined, and perfected the flavors that would eventually define Persian ice cream. And as the mixture melts a little in your dish, you savor the moment. The lineage of flavor is unfolding right in front of you, passed hand to hand, spoon to spoon, generation to generation. You leave the courtyard with a full stomach, a chilled tongue, and a quiet appreciation for how much culinary genius hides in everyday homes. The air outside feels heavier now, thick with late afternoon heat and that unmistakable shimmer that says, "Hello, you are living inside an oven." You wipe your forehead, squint toward the horizon, and follow the sound of rhythmic tapping, soft metal against stone, gentle but steady, almost musical. It reminds you of the beat you heard at the palace feast, but this rhythm is different, sharper, more deliberate, almost hypnotic. Curiosity pulls you toward a narrow alley where sunlight slices through the dust in golden beams. You step inside and find yourself in a workshop, not grand like the palace kitchens, not cozy like the family courtyard, but functional, precise, and humming with focus. Several men are gathered around blocks of ice freshly pulled from a yachtchel. They work with the concentration of artists sculpting marble, except their masterpieces will melt before sundown. You've arrived at the heart of an unexpectedly elegant craft, Persian shaved ice. A mainstream historical fact settles easily into your awareness. Medieval Persians excelled at producing finely shaved ice for desserts known as faluda's ancestors, long before the dessert took its modern form. This wasn't crude scraping, it was technique, skill, and rhythm refined across generations. One of the artisan's motions for you to step closer. He holds a flat metal scoop, somewhere between a spatula and a blade, that he scrapes across the ice block in long, controlled strokes. Each movement shaves off thin curls that flutter down like translucent petals, collecting in a wide ceramic bowl. The sound is mesmerizing, a soft shhhk, shhhk, like parchment being gently torn. You watch the technique closely. The artisan angles the blade slightly downward, draws it toward himself, and flicks the shaved ice into the bowl with his wrist. His hands move in one fluid loop, scrape, flick, sweep, repeat. It's a snow dance performed under unforgiving sun. You attempt the motion in your mind and immediately diagnose the result as personal injury waiting to happen. The man next to him works differently. Instead of long strokes, he uses short, rapid scrapes, producing ice flakes so fine they look like powdered diamonds. He mixes the flakes with a chilled syrup, rose, of course, folding it together softly until the mixture resembles pale pink snow. He lifts a spoonful and lets it fall back into the bowl, watching how it drifts. The texture matters. Too coarse and it melts quickly. Too fine and it turns slushy. You sense something quietly competitive here. Each artisan is proud of his style, and each has strong feelings about what counts as proper shaved ice. One prefers ribbons. Another prefers flakes. A third swears that only snow-like powder produces the perfect mouthfeel. You quickly discover your quirky tidbit. Some workshops believed that the sound of shaving ice predicted the quality of the final dessert. A sharp scrape meant too much force. A dull scrape meant melting. But a soft, smooth scrape, that meant the gods approve. You're not sure if this is science or superstition, but you enjoy the confidence with which it's delivered. As you watch, a young apprentice struggles. His strokes are uneven, and the shaved ice clumps like little icy tantrums. The master beside him clucks his tongue and adjusts the boy's grip. "Your wrist is too stiff," he says. "Relax. Pretend you're coaxing a stubborn camel to drink water." You appreciate the advice, though you also realize that you now have exactly one metaphor to apply to all future life tasks. The master gestures for you to follow him to a corner table where bowls of flavoring sit ready: saffron syrup golden as sunlight, mint syrup cool as shadow, mulberry syrup dark as dusk. He scoops a mound of shaved ice into a bowl, dips a wooden ladle into the saffron syrup, and pours it slowly over the top. The ice absorbs the syrup like sand drinking in rain. The color spreads subtly, gently, making the dessert look like frozen sunrise. He hands the bowl to you. You take a cautious bite, and cold silk sweeps across your tongue. It's delicate, lighter than the bazaar's crushed ice, more refined than the palace's chilled syrups. This isn't a drink. And it isn't ice cream. Not yet. But it is the missing bridge between the two. You close your eyes for a moment to savor it. The artisans chuckle, clearly used to visitors having minor revelations in their workshop. The master explains that their shaved ice is used not only for immediate serving but also for mixtures stored in clay molds lined with cloth. They fold thin sheets of ice and syrup over themselves in layers, layered frost and flavor, which are later broken apart and served in firm, glistening slabs. Some kids prefer these slabs because you can hold them like a treat, even though they melt everywhere. You picture medieval children sticky and delighted, and suddenly feel a little nostalgic for a time period you weren't actually alive in. As you wander deeper into the workshop, you find two artisans experimenting with innovations. One mixes shaved ice with vermicelli-like strands made from starch, yes, actually tiny noodles. He explains that the strands hold the syrup better and add texture. It hits you suddenly: this is the early ancestor of faluda, one of Persia's most iconic frozen desserts. Historians still argue whether the noodle component was inspired by earlier Chinese starch dishes or developed independently. The artisans here don't care, they're too busy adding more rosewater to the mixture. You continue observing, mesmerized by the unhurried dance of ice and syrup. The workers speak softly, their voices blending with the ever-present scrape of metal against ice. You watch a man pack shaved ice into a tall clay cylinder, tamping it down, adding syrup, then layering more ice. He rotates the cylinder slowly, checking texture. When he slides a spoon inside and pulls out a ribbon of ice syrup mixture, it holds together beautifully. Perfect, he murmurs. This batch will last until evening. Evening. The time when heat finally loosens its grip, when families gather, when dessert stalls reopen for their second rush. You imagine these artisans stepping out at twilight to deliver their creations across the town, quiet heroes with clay jars full of cold comfort. A soft breeze slips into the alley, nudging you toward the exit. You take one last look at the workshop, the shimmering bowls, the hum of steady scraping, the artisans shaping coldness with their hands, and you feel awe. This isn't just dessert making. It's choreography. It's craftsmanship. It's patience set to rhythm. You step back into the late afternoon heat, carrying with you the crisp memory of shaved ice and the realization that this humble, tinkling craft formed the backbone of something larger, something creamy, iconic, and fated to change the world's idea of dessert. The sun dips lower. Your shadow stretches long. And the journey continues. You leave the ice-shaving workshop with your senses sharpened, your tongue still tingling from cold syrup, your ears echoing with the soft scrape of metal on ice, your mind buzzing with the realization that you've just witnessed a foundational art. But as you step back into the late afternoon streets, the heat returns with theatrical flair, like it's offended you ever left its embrace. The alleyways shimmer. The stone beneath your feet radiates warmth like a heated floor you did not request. But you keep walking, drawn toward a quieter district where small shops huddle together in crooked rows. This neighborhood is where parchment, ink, and conversation rule. Scribes sit cross-legged beneath shaded awnings, copying poems or accounts with deliberate strokes. Merchants haggle in low voices over bundles of paper. And somewhere between the spice dealers and fabric stalls, there is a faint scent of rosewater and starch that shouldn't belong in a writing district at all. You follow it. It leads you to a tiny side room tucked behind a scribe's workshop, half hidden by a curtain of woven reeds. Inside, two men sit on either side of a low table cluttered with parchment scraps, quills, bowls, and, most importantly, abandoned dessert samples. The air smells like rose, ink, and ambition. You realize instantly, this is where recipes are being born. A mainstream historical fact fits neatly here. Persian culinary manuscripts did exist, collections of medicinal recipes, household techniques, and occasionally food formulas. While not as common as poetry or philosophy, some scribes recorded kitchen knowledge that might otherwise vanish into the sands of time. You step inside quietly. One of the men looks up, a middle-aged merchant with ink-stained fingers and a streak of syrup across his sleeve, suggesting his priorities are refreshingly honest. He waves you closer and points at a parchment filled with tight handwriting. "It's a recipe," he says, "for something cold, or something that might be cold, if the snow doesn't melt too quickly." His excitement is adorable. So is his complete lack of understanding that he's essentially writing one of the earliest ice cream blueprints. The parchment lists ingredients you recognize: rosewater syrup, saffron paste, pistachio flour, and, most intriguingly, thickened milk. Mixed, cooled, layered with shaved ice, or perhaps churned in a pot half buried in the ground at night. You notice the instructions are less step-by-step and more poetic suggestions. Things like, stir until the mixture feels as heavy as good gossip. And, add sugar until the mixture smiles softly. Not exactly helpful for future historians, but it's entertaining. Another parchment nearby contains diagrams, little sketches of clay pots placed inside larger bowls of ice. One drawing even shows a pot being rotated by two children tugging opposite ropes. You blink. This looks suspiciously close to a primitive churn. Your quirky tidbit for this section lands with satisfying charm. Some early dessert makers experimented with rotational cooling devices, clay or metal vessels turned within ice to help mixtures semi-freeze more evenly. Whether these worked efficiently or just gave children something to argue about is unclear. The younger scribe beside the merchant clears his throat and points to a second scroll. This one contains notes collected from various bazaars and households, observations written in an earnest, slightly dramatic tone. The thicker the milk, the slower it melts. The finer the ice, the smoother the mouth feel. Rosewater pairs best with vermicelli. Mint fights with saffron. Avoid unless feeling reckless. Children prefer sweeter mixtures. Adults pretend not to. You grin. These aren't just notes, they're data. Real data. The early scientific method applied to dessert creation. The scribe flips to the next parchment, where he has attempted what he proudly calls a unified dessert theory. You lean closer to read it. Snow plus syrup equals delight. Milk plus cold equals comfort. Saffron plus patience equals brilliance. Everything with pistachio equals better. You nod gravely. This is perhaps the most accurate thing anyone in this time period has ever written. But not everyone agrees. A third scroll, crumpled, ink-blotted, clearly a battleground of ideas, is filled with debates. Arguments about texture. Questions about whether milk mixture should be cooled before adding ice. The occasional frustrated scribble reading, who keeps stealing the rosewater. The scribes explain that scholars still argue whether early ice cream-like mixtures originated in court kitchens or in households. Some believe the recipes trickled down from palace feasts. Others swear they bubbled upward from homes, bazaars, and experimental artisans. And here, in this cramped writing room, the debate becomes ink on parchment. The merchant offers you a small bowl containing one of their test mixtures, thickened milk folded gently with shaved ice and mulberry syrup. You take a bite. It's not quite ice cream. Not faluda. Not sherbet. But it's something new. Something creamy and cold and promising, like the dessert equivalent of a toddler taking its first wobbly step. It melts quickly. Too quickly. A small tragedy. But the idea behind it lingers. The scribe sighs. "We will keep refining it," he says. "Someone will eventually find the perfect way." You believe him. Before leaving, you watch him copy another recipe from a traveler's memory, this one involving frozen grape must mixed with herbs. He adds it to a growing stack of culinary notes that might never see formal publication but will quietly influence generations of cooks. As you step back into the street, the last light of the day spills across the parchment-laden table behind you. Recipes lie open like seedlings waiting for the right season. The air hums with soft potential. These early formulas, messy, experimental, hopeful, will become the backbone of a dessert revolution. And you, wandering through this moment, feel like you've stumbled into the draft version of a masterpiece. The town settles into evening. Lamps flicker. And somewhere in the distance, someone shaves ice for the night rush. The story deepens. Evening settles over the city like a cooling cloth laid across a fevered brow, and you feel the shift immediately. The air loosens its grip. Shadows stretch deeper, softer. Lamps flicker to life along the main roads, turning the streets into threads of gold weaving through the settlement. You walk slowly, grateful for the breeze finally remembering its job description, and drift toward the northern gate where caravans gather before setting out on long journeys across the trade routes. This is where flavors travel. Where ideas travel. Where frozen desserts, still somewhere between dream and prototype, quietly gather the ingredients that will one day define them. You spot a cluster of traders settling on mats, lighting small lanterns, and unloading goods wrapped in burlap, silk, and palm rope. A merchant waves you over with a grin wide enough to make you suspicious in the friendliest possible way. He lifts the corner of a cloth, revealing piles of pistachios glowing green and gold like tiny desert jewels. Beside them sit mounds of almonds, dried limes, candied orange peels, saffron threads fine as spider silk, and rose petals collected from far-off gardens. A mainstream historical fact lands elegantly in your mind. Persia sat at the crossroads of the silk routes, trade networks that stretched from China to the Mediterranean. Spices, nuts, fruits, herbs, and sweeteners flowed through these routes like rivers of possibility. Without them, half the flavors you've tasted so far wouldn't even exist. The merchant scoops pistachios into your hand, encouraging you to taste. You chew, and the nut releases its buttery, slightly sweet richness. It's instantly clear why pistachios eventually become iconic in Persian ice cream. They taste like they were born to be mixed with something cold and creamy. Next, he hands you a small cloth packet. Inside, saffron. Thin threads glowing with the warm fire of dusk. You bring them close, and their scent, earthy, sweet, floral, deep, wraps around your senses. No wonder this spice is valued more than gold in some regions. Saffron is flavor luxury distilled into strands. A trader from the east sits nearby selling candied melons, bright orange and soft as honey. Another offers dried cherries tart enough to make your eyelids twitch pleasantly. You watch the exchange of goods like watching ingredients audition for future dessert stardom. But the real magic begins when you sit beside a caravaner who is sorting through crates of fruit. He offers you a dried apricot dipped in syrup, and while you're chewing, he tells you something quietly astonishing. Certain merchants have begun experimenting with mixing dried fruits into chilled mixtures, sometimes chopped, sometimes crushed into pastes. He claims that texture becomes interesting. You can't help but smile at how understated that is. In modern terms, he's describing topping culture. Your quirky tidbit arrives in the form of a hushed conversation between two Silk Route travelers. One insists that somewhere in India, cooks cool their drinks with hollow metal spheres filled with ice, spinning them to help flavors blend faster. The other claims that in distant China, chilled desserts sometimes included dairy, fruit, or fermented mixtures. Historians still argue whether these accounts influenced Persian dessert evolution or were simply travelers' tall tales generously seasoned with bragging rights. Still, the possibility makes your imagination buzz. You continue wandering through the caravan yard. A spice dealer shows you star anise, cinnamon bark, and cardamom pods, aromas so intense they almost create their own atmosphere. Someone else unwraps a jar of imported citrus syrup with a smell so bright it could guide ships at night. You ask how much of these exotic goods end up in desserts. The answer? As much as the cook can afford. And there it is, the unspoken truth humming beneath the sweetness. Flavor diversity followed wealth routes. Some households had access only to local herbs. Others, especially those living near major trade roads, could experiment with ingredients from half a world away. Slowly, quietly, the most beloved recipes spread, not because kings declared them, but because merchants carried them. You watch as a desert trader pours a little saffron water over shaved ice, creating a sunset-colored treat he says sells well on long journeys. Another mixes ground pistachio paste with chilled milk, thickening it until it clings to the spoon like a shy cat. When folded with ice, he claims it makes a dessert that sleeps nicely on the tongue. You decide that's your new favorite phrase. You sit with a group of travelers sharing mint tea. The air tastes like dust and sweetness, and their stories ripple around you, rumors of distant cities, strange fruits, unknown spices. You realize the silk routes aren't just about physical goods, they are neural networks of taste, connecting cultures through flavor. A wealthy merchant nearby proudly displays a jar of imported syrup so dark it's nearly black. He dips a fingertip into it and lets you taste. It's sweet, tart, smoky, unlike anything you've had so far. He explains it comes from a fruit grown only near certain mountains and that using it in cold desserts is a new trend among the elite. You file that away mentally. Even in the medieval world, there were food trends. Somewhere, a royal chef is bragging about inventing the current saffron wave. As the lanterns flicker and dusk deepens into velvety blue, you sit quietly watching traders pack their goods for the next leg of the journey. Bales of silk. Bundles of spices. Jars of syrup. Sacks of nuts. The stars appear overhead like spilled sugar. And you understand something vital. The rise of Persian ice cream wasn't just about technique. It was about ingredients, an evolving palate shaped by distant landscapes and wandering merchants. Without pistachios, no iconic green. Without saffron, no golden luxury. Without silk routes, no fragrant complexity. The flavors that will define Persian ice cream decades from now are being carried in the hands of travelers sitting right next to you, eating dried fruit and arguing about trade taxes. You stand, the night cool and expectant, knowing that each flavor introduced here is a step closer to the cold, creamy marvel waiting on the horizon. Night falls with a softness you didn't expect from the desert. The heat finally loosens its grip, breathing out a long exhale that leaves the world cooler, calmer, almost tender. Lamps flicker along narrow streets, casting pools of warm light where neighbors linger to exchange stories or gossip gently about whose figs ripened too early this year. The sky unfurls into deep velvet, embroidered with stars. And in this gentler air, this twilight hush, you sense it, people are ready for something sweet. You turn down a winding street where families drift toward the same destination, bowls in hand, coins tucked into fabric belts. Their pace is unhurried, their faces brightened by the simple pleasure of knowing what awaits them. You follow the flow until you reach a small plaza where a crowd gathers around a handful of humble stalls. There, beneath woven awnings and clay oil lamps, Persia's very first ice cream houses are quietly beginning to bloom. They're not called ice cream houses, not yet. The name for them doesn't quite exist. People simply call them cold shops or snow houses, though nobody is storing snow here. Instead, they keep shaved ice, crushed ice, or ice fragments brought from the Yakchal just before dusk. But despite the simplicity, these shops glow with promise. You feel it immediately. This is where the craving becomes a culture. A mainstream historical fact eases naturally into this moment. By the medieval period, some Persian cities had specialized vendors and small shops dedicated mainly to cold desserts, sherbets, shaved ice dishes, and early faluda. Though not identical to modern ice cream parlors, they served a similar social role, a place to gather, cool down, and enjoy sweet comfort. One shop in particular draws your attention. Its sign is a carved wooden sun wearing what might be the world's first bored facial expression. Beneath the sign stands a middle-aged man with a trimmed beard and a scoop tucked into his belt. He gestures welcomingly, and you join the small cluster waiting for bowls. His workspace is simple but efficient: stone slabs, a clay basin of shaved ice, 3 jars of syrup, a bowl of chopped pistachios, and a cooling trough where snow rests under layers of straw. The trough glistens faintly under the lamplight, like a secret the night forgot to hide. He prepares each dessert with steady hands. A scoop of ice. A ladle of syrup. A sprinkle of nuts. A stir, a fold, a quiet flourish. And somehow, each bowl emerges slightly different, tailored by instinct to the customer standing before him. You watch as he hands a bowl to a young couple sharing shy glances. They sit under a lantern, leaning close, their spoons clinking gently. 2 children bounce impatiently on their heels until he gives them bowls piled high with mulberry snow. An elderly man receives a mint version, inhaling deeply before taking his first slow bite. You step closer, drawn into the warmth of the gathering. The vendor turns to you with a smile that says he's been waiting for your curiosity. He scoops a mound of shaved ice into a clay bowl, then drizzles it with a mixture so fragrant your shoulders relax involuntarily. Rosewater. Lime zest. A touch of saffron. Then he adds a handful of pistachios and stirs, folding the mixture until it settles into a soft, glistening mound. You take a spoonful. Even before the cold hits your tongue, you know this is different. It's balanced. Gentle. Creamier than the bazaar's mixtures earlier. More thoughtful than the palace's grand displays. This is the future in disguise. As you savor the treat, the vendor leans in and shares a quiet truth. He's been testing mixtures for months, learning when ice holds texture, when syrups melt too quickly, and when flavor blooms best. People want something cold, he says. But they also want something comforting. He gestures toward the crowd. Look around. The day is too hot. The work is too heavy. When evening comes, they want to breathe again. This helps. And he's right. These ice cream houses, small, unassuming, unadorned, have become vital evening sanctuaries. Here, people pause. Here, they reclaim a sliver of coolness stolen from the mountains. Your quirky tidbit for this section arrives when a second vendor down the plaza complains loudly about a texture rivalry with the shop across from him. He insists his ice is superior because he uses a storage pit beneath the floor that whispers coldness into the bowls. The other vendor rolls his eyes so dramatically you worry they might escape his skull. Historians still argue whether these underfloor cooling pits were genuine features or simply good storytelling mixed with competitive bravado. You stroll among the stalls, tasting, listening, observing. Some shops serve shaved ice with herbs. Others fold starch noodles into their mixtures, early echoes of faluda. A few experiment with milk-based mixtures, though these melt faster and require faster serving. One ambitious man has even attempted layering ice, syrup, ice, nuts, creating something that looks suspiciously like a proto-sundae. The crowd moves in gentle cycles, families arriving from dinner, workers stopping by after long days, children sneaking in for second helpings. The plaza hums with quiet joy, punctuated by laughter, by clinks of spoons, by satisfied sighs that rise like little prayers. And in this small nightly ritual, you see the turning point. Frozen desserts are no longer rare novelties reserved for royalty. They're becoming habits. Comforts. Traditions. They're slipping into the rhythm of everyday life. These early ice cream houses don't feel revolutionary. But that's exactly why they matter. They aren't grand monuments, they're human spaces. Warm spaces. Cool spaces. Spaces where a bowl of scented ice becomes a tiny act of kindness to yourself. You sit on a stone bench, your dessert melting slowly in your bowl, and you realize something lovely. The cold treat in your hands isn't just a mixture of ice and syrup. It's a recipe written by the desert itself, heat demanding relief, people responding with creativity, and culture blooming in the spaces between day and night. And with every spoonful, you feel the slow rise of something that will soon sweep through the region, shaping tastes and memories for centuries to come. You rise from the stone bench with the pleasant heaviness that only a cold evening treat can leave behind. The plaza glows softly now, lanterns swaying from ropes, conversations drifting like warm breezes, the rhythmic scrape of ice echoing from stall to stall. But just beyond this lively center, down a quieter lane, you notice a wooden sign carved with curling lines and small chiseled snowflakes. It's subtle, almost shy, but it pulls you in. You walk toward it. The street is calmer here, lined with workshops and storage rooms. A faint clatter comes from behind one door, metal tapping, bowls clinking, someone clearing their throat with the gusto of a disgruntled camel. You push the door open gently and peek inside. You've stepped into a guild. Not an official one, not yet. There are no grand insignias or membership scrolls. But everything about the scene tells you that this is where knowledge is guarded, shared, and sharpened. Inside, a handful of men and women gather around a long work table. Some wear aprons dusted with shaved ice. Others carry notebooks stained with saffron. The air hums with purpose. You can practically taste the ambition. A mainstream historical fact slides naturally into place. Though medieval Persia didn't have ice cream guilds in the modern sense, many crafts formed loose, specialized associations, makers of metal goods, perfume, textiles, medicines. These networks maintained standards, trained apprentices, and protected trade secrets. And here, dessert makers seem to be developing a quiet, sweet-toothed version of their own. One man, broad-shouldered, beard carefully braided, bangs a wooden spoon on the table for attention. Tonight's agenda, he announces, texture disputes and syrup ratios. You try not to grin. It feels like attending a board meeting where the stakes are delicious. He gestures for everyone to sit. A young apprentice rushes forward with a platter of sample bowls, saffron ice shavings, pomegranate mixtures, mint noodles, and one bowl that looks suspiciously like someone tried to freeze sweetened yogurt with regrettable optimism. A woman at the far end clears her throat and reads from a parchment. First topic, uniform serving technique. Our customers complain that some shops pack the ice too tightly. Two men immediately start arguing. One claims loose packing melts faster, the other insists dense packing ruins the mouth hug, his term for ideal fluffiness. You store that term away for later use in your own emotional vocabulary. Your quirky tidbit arrives when a gray-haired artisan stands up and proudly presents a new invention, a double-sided scraping tool, one edge smooth for ribbons, the other serrated for delicate flakes. He claims it will revolutionize texture. Another artisan scoffs, muttering that serration is a gimmick for people who can't shave ice properly. Guild politics, you realize, are both petty and oddly wholesome. The spoon-banging leader tries to maintain order. Next, he says, we must address the issue of apprentices. All heads swivel toward a corner where three nervous teenagers sit clutching bowls and looking like they're hoping not to be fired before being hired. The leader lectures them on the holy trinity of cold dessert mastery, balance, timing, and calmness under melting pressure. One apprentice nods enthusiastically, then immediately spills rosewater on his lap. You feel for him. On a small side table, you spot several clay pots wrapped in cloth, experimental containers the guild is testing to improve cooling. One is lined with crushed charcoal, another with sand, a third with thin layers of beeswax. The idea is to slow melting while preserving flavor. A heated debate, ironically heated, erupts about which lining works best. Historians still argue whether these techniques were ever widespread or remained niche experiments among obsessive artisans. Judging by the passion in this room, you're leaning toward obsessive artisans. The braided beard leader finally motions you closer. He hands you a bowl full of something creamy, pale, and fragrant. A new mixture, he says, milk thickened slowly with sugar, cooled over ice, then blended with rosewater. You take a tentative bite. It's richer than earlier mixtures, closer to what your modern palate recognizes. Softer. Fuller. More stable. It clings to your spoon just long enough to create anticipation. It's not ice cream yet. But it's flirting with the idea. Around you, guild members jot ratios on parchment, compare textures, argue about temperature, and occasionally taste each other's work with exaggerated seriousness. One man swirls a spoon like a wine connoisseur, sniffing dramatically. Another insists that anyone adding too much pistachio is showing off. A woman beside you experiments with noodles steeped in saffron water, folding them into chilled mixtures to test how they hold syrup. She mutters, "Texture integrity," as if this phrase alone can ward off chaos. You watch her work, realizing she's shaping early versions of faluda. The leader calls the meeting to a close. Everyone stands, stretches, exchanges bowls, critiques, compliments, and the occasional good-natured jab. Apprentices gather scraps to taste later, perks of being at the bottom of the guild hierarchy. As the artisans disperse into the night, you linger in the doorway. The air is cool. The moon rests heavy above the rooftops. And you understand, deeply, that what you've just witnessed is not merely dessert experimentation, it's culture stabilizing. Craft formalizing. Tradition beginning. These loose networks, their debates, their standards, their arguments over spoon angle, are the scaffolding beneath the future of Persian ice cream. Without guild-like spaces like this, innovation would scatter. With them, it gains shape. You step into the lamplit street, carrying the echo of wooden spoons banging on tables, the scent of saffron lingering in your hair, and the knowledge that dessert history is now gently, steadily crystallizing. The night is calm. But the future is stirring. You follow the guild members out into the quiet night, the street now cooled enough that your breath feels lighter, your steps slower, and even the stones beneath your sandals seem less intent on cooking you alive. The city is shifting into its late evening personality, soft voices drifting from open windows, families gathering on rooftops, and the occasional cat making territorial announcements it absolutely cannot back up. But while most people wind down, one particular district is very much awake. You smell it before you see it: rosewater, mint, citrus zest, mulberries, shaved ice. A familiar chorus of sweetness drawing you forward like a dessert-guided compass. You turn a corner and there they are, two ice cream houses facing each other with all the dramatic tension of rival siblings. Lanterns hang from their awnings. Bowls clink. Customers gather in clusters. And the air hums with a very specific kind of energy, friendly competition with just a dash of, "I will ruin you if you steal my regulars." This is the birthplace of dessert rivalries. And you walk right into the middle of it. A mainstream historical fact slips in perfectly. As specialty vendors grew more established, competition naturally followed. Some shops became known for certain flavors, textures, or serving rituals. These reputations spread by word of mouth, slowly, steadily, giving rise to early, brand identity long before logos or catchy jingles existed. At the first shop, the owner is a stout man with a thick mustache that curls at the ends like punctuation. He works calmly, methodically, scooping shaved ice into bowls with the serenity of a monk who has achieved enlightenment in the form of proper freezer technique. His texture is light, almost fluffy, thanks to a technique you recognize from the workshop: long, sweeping scrapes. Customers murmur appreciatively. His rosewater mix glistens like pale gold. His pistachios are chopped so finely they could pass as glitter. And the bowl he hands you tastes, and this is the only correct word here, elegant. Then there's the shop across the street. You feel the shift before you even walk over. This place is louder. Flashier. A young man with a dramatic red sash around his waist performs little flourishes as he mixes ice and syrup, tossing ingredients between bowls like a magician hoping the audience will clap. His texture is chunkier, coarse shaved ice that gives each bite a tiny crunch. His flavors are bold. His attitude says, "Yes, I'm improvising. No, I don't need permission. And his customers absolutely adore him. You take a bite of his creation, a mulberry lime combination, and it hits your tongue with enough brightness to wake up a sleeping horse. You like it, he asks, grinning. You do. You absolutely do. The rivalry becomes clearer as you watch them both work. People drift between the two shops, comparing notes in whispers. Kids argue which texture is superior. Couples share from two bowls, then pretend not to judge each other's choices. The air is full of unspoken loyalties. Your quirky tidbit surfaces when two older men begin arguing loudly near you. Apparently, one believes the mustached vendor invented the threefold stir, a technique for blending syrup evenly. The other insists the sash-wearing young owner created it first but refuses to acknowledge it out of spite. Historians still argue whether the technique belongs to any one vendor or if it evolved collectively. You're beginning to suspect dessert history is 30% innovation, 30% flavor, and 40% gossip. Now that you're paying attention, you spot the subtle differences in serving styles. At the first shop, bowls are always handed with the spoon placed at a perfect angle, never pointing outward. At the second, the spoon is tossed into the bowl casually, like a garnish of chaos. The first shop sprinkles nuts clockwise. The second sprinkles them like confetti from a parade float. One shop serves mixtures in clay bowls cooled in water basins. The other serves them in bowls stored under wet cloths infused with herbs. These differences matter. Each detail becomes part of the shop's personality, a tiny ritual customers cling to as proof their preferred vendor is superior. Nearby, an apprentice hovers between the shops, nervously carrying a tray of samples. He keeps glancing over his shoulder, probably working undercover for one of the vendors. You watch him discreetly taste from both bowls, then scribble something on a scrap of paper. The mustached vendor eyes him suspiciously. The sash-wearing vendor winks at him. The espionage is adorable. A woman sitting beside you explains that one shop is for thinkers, while the other is for talkers. She says this as if it's a universal truth. Another couple insists one shop's desserts melt slower. A group of teens claims one uses secret ice. A father swears one shop sweetens with honey and the other with sugar, but he refuses to name which is which because he likes watching people guess. And historians, centuries later, will look at all this and debate endlessly which shop influenced which recipe. The beginnings of flavor lineage are forming here, but nobody realizes it. They're too busy enjoying the moment. You walk back and forth between the rival stalls, tasting a little more from each. The mustached vendor's saffron ribbon mixture is smooth, mellow, contemplative. The sash-wearing vendor's mint noodle mixture hits like a cool breeze during a heat wave. Both are brilliant in their own ways. Finally, you settle on a low wall between the two, bowl in hand, watching the lively dance of people choosing sides, then secretly switching sides, then denying it defensively. And this is where the beauty of competition reveals itself. Innovation thrives when it has someone to impress, or outshine, or lightly annoy. These two vendors, so different in temperament, technique, and theatrics, are pushing each other without realizing it. Textures sharpen. Flavors evolve. New mixtures appear. Old mixtures improve. This plaza, this tiny evening stage, is nurturing the art that will soon blossom into fully formed ice cream culture. You lean back, letting the cool sweetness melt slowly across your tongue, and smile. Rivalries, it turns out, make desserts taste better. And somewhere in the gentle clatter of spoons and the quiet hum of night, the future stirs again. You leave the plaza of dueling dessert vendors with a satisfied sigh, weaving through twilight streets that now glow with gentle lamplight. Children dart past you carrying half-melted bowls. Families stroll slowly, savoring each bite as if time itself has cooled enough to stretch. Somewhere a musician plucks a setter, its warm notes mingling with the scent of rosewater drifting from nearby stalls. Tonight feels soft, spacious. And as you follow the winding road toward a residential quarter, you notice clusters of people gathering in gardens, courtyards, and rooftop terraces, each group orbiting around something chilled, sweet, and shared. You're walking straight into the cultural rituals that frozen treats quietly inspired. In a small garden behind a low stone wall, you spot a family arranging clay bowls of shaved ice beneath a mulberry tree. Lanterns hang from branches, casting golden halos on their faces. The grandmother sprinkles crushed pistachios onto each bowl with ceremonial slowness. A mainstream historical fact nestles itself here. In medieval Persia, desserts, especially cold ones, often became central to gatherings, poetry recitals, festivals, and nighttime family rituals. Sweetness wasn't merely food, it was atmosphere. A young boy waves you closer, and you join them as they sit in a circle on woven mats. The father recites a poem while the children giggle into their bowls of mint-infused ice. The mother adds a drizzle of tart cherry syrup to your serving, explaining that only sweet desserts are offered during family reunions, never bitter, never sour. Sweetness brings blessings, she says. Coldness brings calm. You taste your bowl. She's right on both counts. As the family shares memories, birthdays, weddings, the story of a cousin who once fell into a yakshal chasing a cat, you hear a lilting melody from the street beyond. It's the sound of a daft drum, soft but steady, accompanied by a voice reciting verses. You bid the family good night and follow the music. It leads you to a rooftop where a group of friends reclines on cushions, bowls of chilled noodles and rosewater resting beside them. A poet stands center stage, center rug, his silhouette framed by stars. He performs a ghazal, each line rising like warm incense then falling into hushed applause. Between stanzas, his assistant passes out small plates of cold desserts infused with saffron, figs, and pistachios. Your quirky tidbit arrives when one of the listeners nudges you and whispers, "Tradition says a good poem tastes sweeter with cold sherbet." You raise an eyebrow, unsure whether this is metaphor or menu advice, but everyone nods solemnly like it's common knowledge. Historians still argue whether cold desserts were tied symbolically to poetic gatherings or if this association bloomed through habit and nostalgia. Tonight, surrounded by verse and sweetness, you're inclined to believe the poets claimed dessert just as confidently as they claimed metaphors. The poet recites, "Cold as the moonlight, sweet as remembrance. The night serves dessert to weary hearts." Everyone sighs dramatically. You join in, because honestly, it's delightful. As you linger, you notice a pattern. Each rooftop gathering includes a dessert bowl placed in the center, an offering, a centerpiece, a shared comfort. Some groups bless the first bowl. Others save a portion for late-arriving guests. One circle has a playful ritual: the person whose bowl melts fastest must tell a joke. You're particularly grateful when yours holds its shape. You wander on, guided by soft laughter and the gentle clinks of spoons. Soon you enter a wide courtyard illuminated by dozens of oil lamps arranged in spirals. At its center, a long stone table holds an array of cold treats, faluda strands soaking in rose syrup, shaved ice shaped like little mountains, milk mixtures cooling in clay pots wrapped in damp cloths. It's a community celebration, an evening feast honoring the end of a hot work cycle. Farmers, craftsmen, and merchants gather with families in tow. Kids chase each other around the lamps. Elders sit cross-legged, sipping cooled herbal drinks with knowing ease. You catch a fragment of conversation: heat shows us our limits. Cold shows us our gratitude. At one end of the courtyard, two women demonstrate a dessert ritual passed down through their village. They layer shaved ice with 3 syrups, cherry, rose, and lime, then seal the top with a sprinkle of toasted nuts. Each layer has meaning: cherry for strength, rose for joy, lime for clarity. They hand you a bowl, and as you taste each layer separately, the flavors unfold like chapters in a story. You notice how people gravitate toward dessert not just for sweetness, but for symbolism. Cold treats represent relief, renewal, and connection. They turn an ordinary evening into something ceremonial. You begin to understand, Frozen desserts didn't just rise through craft, they rose through tradition. Near the courtyard entrance, an elderly man sits surrounded by grandchildren who hang on his every word. He's telling them an old tale of a magical bowl of snow sent from the mountains by benevolent spirits to cool a suffering village. The children gasp, wide-eyed, then immediately try to replicate the magic by mixing mint leaves into their frozen noodles. The man chuckles, ruffling their hair. You walk onward, toward the outskirts where a narrow road slopes toward the rising moon. There you find a small gathering of travelers huddled around a portable lantern. They share a communal bowl of shaved ice mixed with pomegranate syrup. A woman with sand-dusted robes explains that her caravan performs this ritual every time they reach a new town. It cools the journey out of our bones, she says. Without this, our dreams travel too far ahead of us. You take a bite, cold, tart, comforting, and something settles inside you, quiet and deep. Everywhere you go tonight, cold desserts serve as anchors. 4 poems. 4 families. 4 weary travelers. 4 gossip circles. 4 celebrations. They cool not just tongues but tempers, worries, and sun-hammered minds. And yet, beneath all the sweetness, there's a scholarly disagreement hiding in the shadows. Historians still argue whether these dessert-centered rituals emerged because frozen treats became available, or if frozen treats evolved to satisfy pre-existing rituals. Did culture shape the dessert, or the dessert shape the culture? You sip another chilled spoonful and decide both can be true. As the night drifts toward its quietest hour, you pause on a rooftop overlooking the city. Lanterns glow like tiny hearths. Laughter carries softly. Bowls clink faintly below. You realize you're looking at the heartbeat of a tradition, not invented all at once, but woven slowly through gatherings, celebrations, and gentle rituals of sharing. The stars shimmer overhead, and you can't help smiling. Cold sweetness has become more than refreshment. It has become belonging. You leave the rooftop gatherings behind, carrying the warmth of shared stories and the lingering chill of rose-scented ice on your tongue. The city has surrendered fully to night now. Lamps flicker in windows like sleepy fireflies. The breeze cools enough to lift the edge of your clothes, brushing the heat from your skin. Even the stones beneath your feet, scorching only hours ago, feel gentle and welcoming. You walk toward the edge of the settlement where the streets thin and the quiet deepens. This is where tomorrow meets yesterday, where the old world begins to stretch into the newer one. And here, in the hush of late night, you begin to understand how the legacy of Persian frozen desserts will flow into the centuries ahead. The first hint of this comes from a modest home near the outskirts. A middle-aged man sits cross-legged before a tray of cooling bowls. His movements are unhurried, his expression calm. He folds saffron milk into shaved ice with deliberate care, shaping the mixture into smooth spirals. It looks familiar, too familiar. You've tasted it before. Except, this version clings to the spoon differently. More firmly. More confidently. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness like a soft exhale. By the late medieval period, Persian dessert makers had begun perfecting the combination of dairy, sugar, and ice, creating early versions of what would eventually become Bastani, the famed Persian ice cream flavored with saffron and pistachios. Not yet the chewy, elastic marvel of later centuries, but unmistakably on its way there. The man lets you taste his mixture. It's cool, smooth, and richer than anything you've tried yet. He nods approvingly when you smile. One day, he says, this will be common. Children will grow up eating it. Travelers will recognize our land by its sweetness. You continue down the path, and soon you encounter a pair of travelers from a distant city, sitting under a palm awning. They share a bowl of cold falafel-like noodles mixed with sour cherry syrup. The textures are more refined now, the noodles thinner, the strands more uniform. This isn't the rough experimental version from the workshops. This is craft turning into tradition. One traveler mentions hearing of similar desserts being served far away, in Baghdad, in Damascus, even in Cairo. Another claims merchants have started carrying written recipes along the silk routes, sharing techniques with cooks in far-flung cities. Historians still argue whether this cross-pollination was significant or merely coincidental. But sitting here, under the starlit desert sky, listening to these travelers, you sense the truth: sweetness travels easily. Coldness travels eagerly. And good ideas always hitch a ride. A little farther on, you find a small gathering house lit from within. Shadows dance on the walls as people laugh softly inside. Curious, you step in. It's another ice cream house, but different from the lively ones you saw earlier. This one is quieter, almost meditative. The decor is simple: woven mats, lanterns of amber glass, bowls cooled in a shallow stream running under the floor. A young woman tends the counter. She prepares each serving slowly, reverently, as if the dessert itself deserves respect. Her signature creation is a layered mixture: shaved ice folded with milk, pistachio paste, and saffron syrup, topped with rosewater and crushed almonds. You watch her mix the layers together in graceful, swirling motions that feel more like ritual than recipe. She sets the bowl in front of you with a soft smile. You taste it. And suddenly, you see everything at once: the guild's experiments, the household's creativity, the bazaar's improvisations, the palace's elegance, the trader's ingredients, the workshop's precision, the rivalry's improvements. It's all here. Centuries of small steps woven into a single spoonful. Your quirky tidbit comes from an alderman sitting nearby. He claims that in some villages, cold desserts were once used as peace offerings between feuding families. If someone brought you a bowl of chilled sweetness in summer, it meant they were ready to talk again. Whether this was widespread custom or local legend is unclear. But the idea feels right: cold desserts soothe more than just heat. They quiet tempers, soften hearts. The woman behind the counter tells you that she's planning to train 2 new apprentices next month. This is becoming a profession, she says, almost shyly. A real one. People expect quality now. They return if we get it right. Her voice carries pride, quiet but unmistakable. And there it is, the final truth rising on the horizon: the ice cream house is no longer a novelty. It's becoming an institution. You step back into the street, watching as the settlement relaxes into the softest hours of the night. Dogs curl by doorways. Night-blooming flowers release their perfume. A few families sit outside sharing one last bowl of mint ice before sleep. You walk through pools of lamplight, each one revealing small acts of sweetness: a child giving the last spoonful to her mother, an elderly man humming while stirring his dessert, 2 teens debating which vendor has the best texture, as if this is the most important question in the world. You slow your steps. The world feels cooler now. Gentler. Your journey has brought you from desert heat to domed ice vaults, from mountain caravans to bustling bazaars, from household courtyards to early shops, from guild halls to cultural rituals. And now, you stand at the turning point where all these paths converge. The frozen desserts of medieval Persia didn't rise suddenly. They rose slowly, patiently, like ice forming grain by grain, layer by layer, under the desert moon. And as you look over the sleeping city, bowls gleaming in hands, spoons clinking softly in the dark, you understand the legacy fully. Sweetness is a memory. Cold is a blessing. And culture grows where people gather to share both. The night deepens further, settling into a calm so soft it feels like silk brushing across your shoulders. The distant chatter fades, replaced by the gentle hush of desert wind weaving through quiet streets. You walk slowly now, not out of fatigue, but because the world around you has begun to drift into that in-between space where moments feel lighter, softer, almost weightless. The lamps burn lower. The stars glow brighter. And the last traces of sweetness linger on your tongue like a comforting whisper. You picture the city around you: cooling rooftops, shaded courtyards, sleeping gardens, each holding its own memory of tonight's desserts. The shaved ice, the rosewater, the saffron threads catching lamplight, the bowls passed from hand to hand with easy generosity. all of it blending into a gentle hum of quiet joy. As you walk, your steps grow slower, the stones beneath your feet smoothing into familiar rhythm. The heat of the day feels distant now, softened by the coolness that rose patiently from ice, from snow, from mountain air carried into the heart of the city. Even your breath settles, deepening, lengthening, finding an easy cadence in the stillness around you. The world shrinks to small comforts, the memory of chilled sweetness melting slowly on your tongue, the sound of spoons tapping lightly against clay bowls, the glow of lanterns wavering in the night breeze. Everything feels unhurried. Everything gently unwinds. So allow yourself to unwind with it. Let the coolness linger. Let the quiet settle into your chest. Let the story dissolve into a soft blur, like the final spoonful of ice melting into sweetness. And as your eyes grow heavier, feel the calm of this ancient night wrap around you, steady, peaceful, and cool as the first breath of dawn.